Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to Vlogmas Day 2. Today I'm going to be talking about my debt story, or how I paid off 5 grand of debt. Before we get into the video, I just want to make a few disclaimers because debt, I think, is quite a sensitive topic for some people. My first and most important disclaimer is something that my mum always tells me, and that is that no problem is insurmountable. Whether you have 100 times my debt, half my debt, whatever it is, there's always something you can do, and there's always people that can help. If you're suffering from debt anxiety or depression related to your debt, or you need help, please reach out to some of the debt charities that I will leave linked down below. But also, as with all of my finance videos, this is just my personal experience, and I know that I'm very privileged in some ways, so please be kind in the comments. Everyone's journey is different. So let's get into it. My debt story. The first debt that I ever had was when I was 18 years old, and my sister Yasmin told me that you could go to a bank and they'd give you something called an overdraft. And I was like, what? And she was explaining it to me. She was like, yeah, they'll literally just give you the money today. Now, at the time I was working in a bar, so I did have an income. I definitely wouldn't recommend going into any kind of debt if you don't have any income to pay it off, because everything you borrow, you do have to pay back. But yeah, we went down to the bank and she talked me through it and helped me open up my first £200 overdraft. And then as we left the bank, she said, can I borrow 50 quid? So we went to the cash point and lent her 50 quid, and that was how my line of credit began. She did pay me back the £50, and she has been more than generous to me over the years since then, so absolutely no shade to Yasmin. But I just thought that was funny. That's typical like sister behaviour, to be like, yeah, you can do this thing. Oh, can I borrow 50 quid? So that was my first thing, my overdraft. Now, as I went off to uni after my gap year, I just kept making my overdraft bigger and bigger. So by the time I reached the end of my 3-year degree in Bristol, my overdraft was maxed out at £2,000. I did work while I was at uni. I worked in the holidays, not during term time, but I wasn't paying off my overdraft. I was just partying a lot, to be honest, and spending all my money. I had no thoughts about debt. I didn't care about it really. I should also mention, I can't remember when exactly, but I think around the end of the second year of uni, I had another credit card that I maxed out to £1,200. And my parents very kindly paid that off for me. Well, my mum did. Thanks, mum. I know that's like super privileged, but I'm just being honest with you. That's what happened. When I was 20 years old, my mum paid off my £1,200 credit card. So by the time I graduated, it was just the £2,000 overdraft that I had. Shortly after graduation, I decided to go traveling around Central America with my friend. We were meant to be like saving for 6 months after graduation while we lived in Bristol. But honestly, again, I was just partying loads and enjoying my life in Bristol. And I did have another credit card at that point, which by the time I left for Mexico was pretty much maxed out. If not, I maxed out while I was in Mexico. And this time the credit card was for £1,800. So by the time I got back from Mexico, I had an overdraft of 2 grand and a credit card of £1,800. I made a huge mistake while I was in Mexico, and that was that I decided to stop paying the credit card. The minimum payments were about £50 a month, and £50 goes a lot further in Guatemala than it does in London. So I just stopped paying it. I had no money left by the time I came home from Guatemala. I used like my last £30 to get the bus back up to Mexico City to fly home. So yeah, that was my first big debt mistake. The reason this is such a big mistake is because I got like a black mark on my credit score, which stays on for 7 years. I'm now looking to buy a house, and when I look on my credit score report, I can see in the oldest year, those 3 months that I didn't pay the credit card are still there in black. Thankfully, as we go into 2023, that will finally clear off, but that is a big regret of mine. So when I came home from Mexico, I got myself a job and I began to pay back this credit card, by which point the bank had actually sold it to debt collectors. So I phoned up the debt collection company like 3 or 4 months after I was supposed to have made the payments and said, hi, I'd like to pay. Here is where I think I made debt mistake number 2, and that is I should have tried to negotiate with the debt collecting company that if I made a big lump sum, maybe they could have reduced the amount that I owed. I felt so bad about not having paid my credit card that I was very much like upfront and was like, hi, I'm here, I want to pay everything. So I went on a monthly payment plan. They asked me how much I could afford to pay. I think I said £200, but I could have perhaps said, instead of the £1,200 I owed, if I pay you all in bulk now, can I just pay you 800? And that could have saved me some money in the long run. So that's always something worth doing. I haven't got any personal experience in doing that, but I see finance educators tell people to try that, and you know, nothing ventured, nothing gained, so you may as well try. So during this whole time, I just always lived in my overdraft. I never really managed to pay it off. I feel like maybe I'd pay off a couple of hundred and then it would come to Christmas and I would extend it again. So by the time I started my master's degree, I think I was about 27 years old, and the only debt I had was the £2,000 overdraft. However, I feel like I had underperformed in my undergraduate degree, and I was really determined to do well in my master's degree. So I was only working in ZZ's a couple of days a week. And when exam period came around, I quit that job and I didn't work at all for a month and a half. So I, you guessed it, got my third credit card during this time. And by the time I finished, that was maxed out to £1,800. So I had my £2,000 overdraft and an £1,800 credit card at this point. After exam period, I managed to get a job as a finance assistant, and it was time to write my dissertation. By this point, I really needed a new laptop, and I took out on PayPal credit, it was 0% interest, £1,200 for a new MacBook, which I still use to this day, and I don't regret. I did really need a laptop, and it was an investment, as was my degree. So I don't regret any of that debt necessarily, but it did mean that at my peak, I was £5,000 in debt. I kind of tried not to worry about it while I was writing my dissertation, and then I finally graduated in December of 2019 with a distinction. I was so chuffed, and I really feel like the sacrifices I made paid off. And then I was like, yo, we've got to tackle this debt. So by the time I made my spreadsheet and stuff, which I'll show you later, and I got serious about debt repayment, my laptop payments were down to £400 a month. They were like £200 a month, and I was making those religiously. I was paying my overdraft interest of £50 a month, and I was paying my credit card interest of £50 a month as well. £300 a month was already going to my debt without me even increasing any payments. And £100 of that was an interest, which was very painful to see. I kept looking at that £100 and thinking, that's £100 I could be spending, that's £100 I could be saving. So that is really what inspired me to pay off my debt. I was also still living at home at this point. There's no way I could have afforded to have done a master's degree and not be living at home. And I really wanted to move out, and I knew that it's not wise to go and start renting a place where my rent is suddenly going to jump from what I was paying my mum to a private landlord. I knew it would be much more, so I needed to get myself debt free before my boyfriend and I could move out. So that's why I wanted to pay it off, but how did I pay the debt off? I'm going to talk about the 4 steps that I took. So the first step that I took is I got organised, and I faced my fears, and I looked in all of my accounts and I wrote down everything that I owe. I know this is scary, especially if your debt is a lot bigger than mine or you have a lot of other debts, but really the only way to tackle this problem is to face the problem head on and write down everything that you owe. I then looked at all of my incoming money, and I made a budget to plan for how much I could commit to paying off debt monthly. I'll link a video to my current budget now. Obviously I was making less money back then, but the layout and the columns are exactly the same, that the numbers are just different. I literally had one column of all my incoming money, one column of all my outgoing money, and I calculated each month what I wanted to pay off in debt. So when you have multiple different sources of debt, you need to decide which one of them you want to prioritize first. One method is to pay off the smaller debts first. I believe this is called the snowball method. I'm not entirely sure, but it basically involves devoting most of your budget to the smallest debts so that as they clear, you kind of feel more momentum and motivation to keep going. And the other one, which is probably fiscally the best, is to pay off the one that has the highest interest rate first. But if that is like one of your biggest debts, it can be quite demotivating to just be chipping away at like a huge debt. For example, maybe not your mortgage, but maybe like a big car. For me, I only had £400 left on my laptop, and I just wanted to clear that off. So I kept doing the £200, so within 2 months that had gone. And then between my credit card and my overdraft, they were both similar interest rates, and I decided to tackle my credit card first. I think the reason I tackled my credit card first is just that it stressed me out more. It felt more of a bad debt to me than the overdraft. So yeah, I focused most of my money into paying off my credit card first. The third thing I did is I really immersed myself in personal finance content and motivational content around this time. One of the podcasts I really liked at the time was The Mindset Mentor by a guy called Rob Dial. They're quite short podcasts and sometimes they're a bit cheesy, but they're very much just kind of like get up and go when you're just like sat scrolling on the sofa and you need someone to tell you to literally just get up. At the time, I was also listening to Dave Ramsey, who I now find very problematic because I don't think he takes into account anybody's circumstances. He is like a 70-year-old white man in America, and he just thinks that everyone has been afforded the same privileges as him, and he has a very no-nonsense attitude towards finance. But I think when I was spending so frivolously, I did need a little bit of tough love, but that doesn't excuse the rest of his attitude issues. I wouldn't necessarily recommend him, but to be open, I was listening to his podcast every day on the way to work. In terms of books, I read a lot of personal finance books as well. I read the big classic ones, you know, like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Again, similarly to Dave Ramsey, they made a lot of their money in like the property market in America 50 years ago, and it's just not something that's applicable to us today. One that I really loved for mindset was You Are a Badass at Making Money, which was a very cringe title, and it was like a bright green book, so it's quite embarrassing to read in public, but it really inspired me to be like, yes, I can make money, like I've got this. It was just great for my personal like mindset development. And that kind of leads me into step 4, which was I decided to increase my income. I will make a separate video about all my different side hustles, but during this period that I was paying off my debt, I did also lose my job for 2 months. It was during lockdown and I was unemployed between March and April, and I think I started my new job in June because my new job kept delaying my start date because obviously no one knew what was going on in the world. I was fortunate enough to be living at home at the time, so for the months that I was unemployed, my mum did like waive my rent, which I realise is a huge privilege that not everybody has. Obviously, I'm super grateful to my mum for that, but I also want to say that even if you're not living at home, you can still pay off your debt. It might take a bit longer, but don't lose hope because you're watching this video and you're like, oh, but I've got to pay my rent. It's okay, you can still do it. It will just take you a bit longer. So yeah, my first biggest side hustle was eBay. I organised my mum's shed with my boyfriend, cleared everything out, and I sold loads of bits from it, like honestly, kind of junk. And I made like £600 off the bat just from selling things from around the house that I cleared. I actually turned reselling into like a little side business, and I think I turned over like 8 grand in the first year. So it was like a fairly big side hustle for me. I think the fact that it was lockdown also helped me pay off my debt because I literally had nothing to spend my money on. So yeah, obviously living at home and the fact that it was lockdown both helped me to spend less. But now that we're back to normal life, you can still definitely adjust your spending habits. I do a budget series on TikTok where I share what I spend every single day, and I try to stick to a budget every single month. So I'll link that down below if that's something you're interested in. So as you can see from this spreadsheet that I'm going to put in, I became debt-free on October 2020, which was 10 months after December 2019 when I first sat down and made that spreadsheet and decided I wanted to get debt-free. So that's like £4,200 paid off in 10 months, but 2 months of that I was unemployed. So I think that's pretty good going. I know some people that will have paid off their debt much quicker than that. And I also know people that have taken a lot longer to pay off their debt. So the main thing is just be making small steps every day. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful to you, and I hope it lifted the shroud of secrecy around debt a little bit. If you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and click subscribe, and stick around for the rest of Vlogmas. I've got loads more finance videos coming. So yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.